ADHD reWired, episode 457. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. Today's guest is Chris Wang. Chris is the co-founder and CEO of Shimmer, an ADHD startup offering bite-sized coaching to individuals with ADHD. She is an entrepreneur, social impact advocate, angel investor, growth consultant, and forever tinkerer. She believes strongly that business should be used as a force for good, and that impact not only isn't the enemy of profit, but is a catalyst. This thesis underpins every decision she makes, especially when it comes to the communities she is a part of and cares the most about: the LGBTQ+, the AAPI, women, non-binary, and neurodiversity, especially with ADHD. And just from all of my interactions that I have had with Chris over the last month or two, it's just a fun person to chat with. Chris, thanks for being here. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. I'm super excited for this, as you probably know from the amount of text messages you got from me last night. So thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. So I think for starters, I wanted to share that when we were kind of going through our little checklist before we hit record, one of my items was, all right, got my Adderall, took my afternoon booster. And then you told me what?
So I said I actually stared at my Adderall for a long time before this meeting and then decided not to take it, which Eric was like, why? So for me, I know it's different for everyone, but I actually find without Adderall, I'm a bit like scattered, yes, but also like a little bit more weird and funny. And I thought that might be useful for this conversation. But then with my Adderall, I get into my more kind of a focused mode. So yes, I apologize if I'm a little bit scattered, but I thought the benefits might have outweighed the con for this particular situation.
Awesome. Okay. So this should be fun. So there's so much that we can kind of explore here, from intersectionality, sort of your queer identity, Asian identity, the person with ADHD, and you're a pretty impressive entrepreneur. Like when you were first sharing with me about your history, I was like, damn, this girl is sharp. So tell me about your story and kind of how you got to where you are today with you just launching this new business.
Yeah. So I guess there's two things in there. There's like my ADHD me, and then there's also the entrepreneur me, which I guess they intersect. But I guess I'll start with the ADHD. So when I was a kid, I was super hyperactive. I was very impulsive. I was kicked out of everything, or I was like placed in like this special desk against the wall, so that I didn't bother anyone else. I had my special desk. A lot of fond memories there. But I skated under the radar for a really long time. Like, one, because I got good grades, and two, because we don't talk about mental health in an Asian family. We don't even take medicine when we have a cold, and we never got flu shots as a kid. So all of those things are kind of a little bit intertwined. But I always did feel like a bad kid. I felt like I wasn't doing my good job of being a kid because all I had to do was just go to school and like not get in trouble. But that was the opposite of what happened.
Where did you get those messages from? Was it from family, from teachers?
Yeah, so it was mostly teachers. I think at home, I actually didn't feel that bad. I felt like parents were always supposed to be mad at the kid. I just was normal to me that I was always getting in trouble. And if I have two siblings, and if they did something wrong, it would also be my fault that I didn't stop them. But I feel like it was more at school because other people weren't getting in trouble, but I was, and other people weren't sitting at that desk. I was. So it was definitely from school the most, at least how I internalized it. I did later learn from, I think it was from Chad, that children with ADHD, by the time they're 12, they get 20,000 more negative messages than people without ADHD. And that fact just boggled my mind. And I probably got even more because I asked a lot of questions. So I got a lot of answers.
Yeah. So when were you actually diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed last year, so fairly recently. So all of this is quite new to me. There were I guess, two main reasons as to what led me to my diagnosis. One of them crosses with the entrepreneurship piece that you were asking about. The first one was the pandemic, and going remote was very hard for me. I'm a very in-person person, and I started my master's in business administration and master's in public health, dual degree. I definitely bit off more than I can chew right when the pandemic started. Oh, wow. I lasted a full 2.5 months before I dropped out. And so that was the first fact or not fact, but I guess thing that drove me towards a lot of my ADHD symptoms flaring up. And the second one was, fast forward a little bit, when I did start the company, our first concept, we ran support groups, that failed. And that was hard for me to navigate. But I also then got flung back into a situation where I had no structure, I had no boss, I had no direction, then everything flared up again. So those two experiences led me to a long process of eventually getting diagnosed for something that I kind of knew my whole life that I had. And the TikTok and Instagram algorithms also knew that I had. I've been targeted since the beginning of time.
Well, it's funny. There's been jokes. I don't know if you ever listened to NPR. There's a news comedy show called Wait, Don't Tell Me. And there was a punchline in there about people learning that they have ADHD because of TikTok. And, it's interesting because, there's actually, I don't remember who actually did the study, but there was a study that came out that 50% of the information about ADHD on TikTok is not accurate.
I'm actually not surprised by that. I think I watched a teardown by Jessica McCabe from How to ADHD, and she was tearing down the TikTok posts and Instagram posts. And that is where I learned that, or I guess I'm not surprised by that stat.
Yeah. And it's funny because there's a lot of relatability, but it's important that we're all talking about the same thing if we're talking about ADHD, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So you said you were starting this other creating online support groups, and you said that it failed. So talk about that a little bit.
Yes. I guess for brevity, I was a little bit harsh. We helped a lot of people. I'm very proud of what we did. We ran identity-based groups. So we had Asian groups, we had queer groups, and we had challenge-based groups. So we had groups for anxiety and depression. But I guess we failed by traditional startup dogma. We didn't grow fast enough. The margins weren't there. We couldn't get enough growth in a short enough time. So based on the way that we had started our business, we could no longer run it. And we had to make the decision to shut it down, which was hard because we had members who really liked our product and were relying on it for their support.
That must have been hard.
Yeah. We let it run actually for a little while longer and just, I guess, poured a little bit of money into it just so people didn't have that abrupt end. I think we let it run for another 3 months while we turned our attention to try to figure out what was next.
Okay. So what did you learn from that? And then I imagine things that you learned from that you maybe put towards building Shimmer.
Yeah. So it's actually funny because our biggest learning we didn't adhere to. Chris,
which is so I love it. I love this adage about people with ADHD that we tend to be very experiential learners. The only problem is we don't always learn from our experiences.
Yeah, exactly. I'm I have the learning. It's on a sticky note, but we didn't follow it because we followed our heart instead. But no, our biggest learning was, or at least from a business perspective, was that what we were doing was too heavy-handed because we had peer facilitators, we had scheduling, we had to put people into groups, we had to do all these things. It wasn't well fit for the typical, I'm putting quote marks, typical startup, where you have a software product where you can just scale and there's no variable cost. So when we left our old model, we said, let's do something that doesn't involve people. Let's do something that is technology based. And let's do something where we can focus on the product and then be able to scale it up and down very easily. So from an intellectual standpoint, that was our biggest learning. That would make our life easier. But then obviously the ADHD space is very close to my heart. And as we were exploring solutions and working with members and working with coaches and clinicians, we quickly realized that people with ADHD need that human element to be there to tell them, or to at least keep them accountable, to give them a little bit of like spice and fun. It's not the same as just having an app. So that was us just, I guess, not learning from our own advice.
So, hearing you talk just about like the whole like startup world and like the margins and all this stuff, you did just say that you started an MBA program but dropped out after a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you learn all this stuff?
So we were in a couple accelerators. So I always say that I didn't pay for an MBA, but then I got a lot of the value from an MBA, because what I did get from the MBA was, in the beginning, when we had a team, there were people in the MBA, there were people in the UCSF medical program that were part of our team. So we continued to take Shimmer through those classes, even though we weren't in the actual class. So that was a big help. And then also the accelerators that we were in, XX being one of the first people who believed in us, they took us in. There was only 10 companies in that batch. So we got a lot of very targeted attention, and they helped us. And we have a mentor from there that we still talk to whenever we have any challenges. And then shortly after, Y Combinator as well. So I think we were always in something that was a little bit structured, which works well for me, even though philosophically I don't like structure, but practically I need structure. So having those external pieces of accountability and structure and community definitely for us was what kept us in the game.
Mm. So as you're in this startup environment, right, how do you like the process from going from ideation of here's this idea to getting funding to like figuring out like how did you figure out what it was that you needed to figure out?
That is a very interesting question that doesn't have a direct answer. But for me specifically, everything was iterative. We had technically kind of two separate businesses. And I already feel like this time, even though I'm still technically a first-time founder, we're already so much better than we are the first time. So experience definitely is number one, even if you don't follow all of your learnings. But I definitely think community is number one. Even before we got into accelerators, we joined these Slack communities of people who are building and people who are building similar things. And you really quickly just start, I guess, networking and just meeting people who are in similar spaces as you. And we did some kind of founder support groups, but were more business related. So they weren't just about mental health, but more about what is one challenge that you're going through right now. And then the whole group will try to help you. So if I had to pick one thing, I would definitely say just building in community. That's how you learn, because you would just ask questions and people would answer it. And then a lot of those communities also connect you with mentors in the space. So just for like a 30-minute call, it'll be like a growth expert. But if you don't want to take as deep of a dive, I think a really great place to start is a lot of these accelerators have YouTube series. Like Y Combinator has a really good YouTube series, and you can kind of just follow their lead and they'll walk you through everything that you kind of need to know in bite size, not super bite size, but kind of bite size videos.
I love how like you don't take the traditional approach. Like, you know what you want to kind of go after and learn. And even if it's not done in the sort of traditional way, like you go after the learning. And I think that's awesome. When you were doing sort of in this sort of accelerator space, working with other entrepreneurs, did you ever feel like, because I know for myself, so I've been working for most of this year with a business accelerator program, and it's been a really big investment. And I kind of like go back and forth between like, yes, this is like really good for me. This is helping the business. And then on the other side, I'm like, this is the most not ADHD friendly thing. Like spreadsheets and tracking and data I'm supposed to be like keeping track of. And how did you feel in that space?
I think it depended on which accelerator for sure. So a good one. So for the XX, for example, the core of what we did was human to human. So we had like a mentor meeting every single week. And then we had a group meeting where we would all report out our metrics every week. And that second piece was what kept us accountable and going, because we'd be like, oh no, well, like we didn't reach our X percentage of growth that we were looking for. Like everyone's going to know. And it was like a healthy amount of like accountability / shame. So I think that there were things that were done really well. I have also, I won't name which ones, but I have been in non-ADHD friendly accelerators where they make you do a lot of like tracking. It's in very specific things. I have a few where I could never find where the portal was, and And when someone commented on it, I could never respond to the comment. I just remember just being so frustrated that I couldn't remember how to get to these things that people seem to be able to easily get to. And just the way it was structured and the software and everything was very unintuitive. And that's something that I think about a lot, even as we design our products. And obviously we're also a tech product.
And I love that. So it sounds like you're taking your experiences and kind of what you would want for yourself, and then putting that into what you're developing as this product and service.
Yeah, I think that's been honestly the biggest difference for me between this Shimmer and the old Shimmer with support groups. Because I feel like, well, I know that the community and the solution are things that I use, and it makes it very easy for me to be intuitive about things and to care a lot about it. Versus with the old support group, I was in the support group because I knew it was valuable for people and I was running it, but I didn't feel as strong of a pull just because I wasn't the exact target market that we were kind of serving. So definitely being able to resonate with your product on an intuitive level. There's a lot of pros. I'm sure there's also a lot of cons that I just don't know. I think that sometimes like taking your own intuition too far can also be a bad thing, which is why we are very adamant. We do so much customer feedback whenever we can to gut check that. Sometimes I go like, oh, I need this to be this font because this is the only font that looks good. And then another customer will be like, no, that's really ugly, actually.
No, I definitely hear that, and that piece of like really seeking out feedback. That's so critically important. And, not just for, I think, being in business, but I think for life. Like, if you're struggling with no matter what it is, like if you're not open or seeking feedback, how are you going to expect to like be able to do better?
Exactly.
Right. How are you going to expect to learn or uncover those blind spots? Because often it's those blind spots that trip us up the most. Yeah,
exactly. Having the awareness and also like confidence, I don't know if these are the right words, but to ask for help, I think you have to be, there's like this balance of vulnerability and confidence, because it's really hard to ask for help, especially when you are asking for something that might hurt you. It's definitely not easy. Vic is my co-founder. Vic and I do feedback every single Friday, and it's always a very deep conversation, and they always run like 3 times as long as the time that we have slotted.
And does he have ADHD?
No, he doesn't. It is great for me because as my co-founder, he catches so many of my blind spots. It's incredible. And he's so detail oriented. He's so patient and calm and everything that I am not, and a lot of things that I aspire to be. So I'm very lucky to have him, and he doesn't think I'm too annoying because he's still here. So
I'm willing to bet that there's a lot of the same things that he's probably saying about you, that, that she's spontaneous and creative and energetic and everything that I'm not. Like, and I think that's when you find that kind of partnership, it's keep nurturing that, because if you find a partnership like that really works, nurture that, because those are sometimes hard to come by.
Yeah.
What I want to do is I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I would actually love if you would sort of take us into what those feedback sessions kind of look like and sound like, because I think that's something that a lot of us, whether we're entrepreneurs or just looking for feedback in any other area of life, could benefit from. So we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from ARC. That's ADHD Rewired Coaching at coachingrewired.com. Registration for our winter season is happening now, so go to coachingrewired.com to get started with your pre-registration process so you can join us for our next registration event happening this Thursday, December 1st at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. Are you tired of feeling stuck? Does it feel like you spend hour after hour, day after day, mulling over unfinished projects? Do you have habits that, even though you have every intention on starting, you just can't seem to stick to them or get them kicked off the ground? Do your days feel so full that by the end of your day, you're left wondering when you'll finally have time for you? If you're done with this constant feeling of overwhelm and want to gain forward momentum with the goals and projects you've been wanting to start, then start here. Begin your pre-registration process by going to coachingrewired.com and add your name to our interest list so you can take the first steps to launching into the new year by putting you first.
So I decided to join because I was trying to do this by myself and it just wasn't working.
Before, I would ask myself, what do I even offer to the world? I was just in a really low place.
Before this group, I was so incredibly tired and I knew I needed to make a change. So here I am.
I joined the group for all the tricks of how to plan, and they work.
Yeah, learning to plan. Planning was probably my biggest thing, and the importance of daily planning and thinking that through, whether it's the night before, the day or the morning of, yearly planning, and how much that's going to affect me in the future.
It just completely changed my outlook. I'm learning to reframe things. I see value in myself. I see where I can succeed. I see where I can have a lot of growth.
The thing that I learned was I have a place in this world.
To be around these people that think like I do, it's just such a relief to know that you're not alone, that you might not think like everybody around you, but you certainly think like a bunch of people that are in the world.
When I think of success, I now focus on what is kind, compassionate, and possible. I try not to think about what I should or should have done or what people expect of me, and instead try to think of what I really want and what I think I'm capable of.
If you're thinking of joining this group, just do it. You cannot regret this. You will not regret it. You only have gains. It's hard, but it's so worth it.
This is the coaching group built for adults with ADHD by adults with ADHD. Not only will you learn how to better manage your calendar and create routines that work for you, you will also learn how to ask better questions and communicate what you need to succeed. So if you want to kickstart your personal growth and begin the new year by investing in you, then get registered for our next registration event this Thursday, December 1st at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern by going to coachingrewired.com. Registration is by invitation only. So go to coachingrewired.com to start your pre-registration process so you can join us this Thursday, December 1st at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. And if you are listening to this after that, go to the website, coachingrewired.com to find out when our next registration event is. Come grow with us and meet other adults with ADHD just like you by taking the first step at coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. We can't wait to meet you. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from Adult Study Hall at adultstudyhall.com, where you can get support for your toughest to-dos and not have to work alone again. Learn more and join the virtual body doubling community built for adults with ADHD by adults with ADHD. Go to adultstudyhall.com to learn more and to sign up. It's only $19.99 a month and it's free for the first week to try. When you join us at adultstudyhall.com, your membership will include access to our weekly facilitated sessions, which we call our Adult Study Hall Plus or ASH Plus sessions, to work on anything from job searching to decluttering, writing, creative work, and more. And if you prefer working at your own pace, then you'll have access to our 24/7 drop-in room or ASH 24/7. That's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for online co-working around the clock. Access to Adult Study Hall is free for the first week to try, and it's only $19.99 a month after that. The doors are open at adultstudyhall.com. Come work with us. That's adultstudyhall.com. All right, we are back with Chris Wang, co-founder and CEO of Shimmer. All right, so right before the break, you were talking about how you and your co-founder have these feedback sessions every Friday.
Yeah.
Take us there. What are those conversations like?
So we actually, a lot of this was derived from inspiration from a founder coach. She's called thefoundercoach.com. And she calls these conversations level 3 conversations. I actually don't know what level 1 and 2 are, but I intuitively understand it means that they're deep conversations. So what we do is first go over business stuff before we go into the level 3 conversation. So we'll talk about our metrics, what we got done, what we didn't get done, why we didn't get them done. And then we go into the 2 main sections of feedback. One is team-wide feedback, where we aren't placing blame or pointing a finger or saying it's you or me. It's just as a team, we need to get better at certain things. Then 2 is more personal feedback. So for the team-wide feedback, we always talk about what are things that are going well? What are things which that one actually is hard. Sometimes we skip over it. As I was just telling Eric before we started, whenever we need to celebrate something, we're always like, oh, wow, this great thing happened, but these are all the things we could have done better. So we try really hard to make sure we're bringing in the positive moments to celebrate because that's what keeps us going. And then we talk about things that are going poorly. So we will give an example. So I'm just looking at last week. We have not spent enough time looking at customer retention and why customers are staying on our platform. So then we'll do a brainstorm from there. Okay, what do we want to do differently next week to make sure that we don't have this feedback anymore? And then there's a little like red exclamation mark next to it because that one was the important one. And then we go into the level 3 convos that are personal. And so what we always do is we start with ourselves. We give ourselves feedback as to what was good and bad that week. And for us, that's really important because sometimes when you're about to rate on someone else about something, when you hear that they are being self-critical themselves about that item and that they've already acknowledged it, maybe you don't need to be so hard on them, or maybe you don't even need to bring it up anymore. You already know that they know, and them coming up with themselves is sometimes even better. So we always start with ourselves. So we say, this week I was good at XYZ. This week I was not good at XYZ. And then we move to the next person. And for the next person, there are some like best practices that I really like for feedback because I love feedback. The one thing is bringing up, starting with kind of like how it made me feel, making it more about the impact on me without putting judgment or blame onto the other person. And then 2, having super concrete examples. I think sometimes people think this is a little bit like you're nitpicking, but I think it's really important that people understand exactly what was the specific situation. And then you can kind of dissect it in a non-judgmental way. So we do that for both positive and negative. So I will, like, for example, I will go first. We alternate to make sure it's fair. So I'll go first this week. I'll say what I did well, what I didn't do well. Then I'll tell Vic what he did well, what he didn't do well. And then the last piece that I'll throw in there is sometimes just telling someone what they can do better. It starts to scratch at the surface. But what you can do to take it even one step further is tell them things that weren't bad, but they're like the next step. So like, this wasn't bad, but if you wanted to be like Vic on superpowers, you could do this thing that could be even better. And I would have felt even, I don't know, more inspired or more however. And I think that's how we help elevate each other because we don't have bosses. We only have each other to give that like honest and upfront feedback.
What kind of person do you think that it takes to be able to engage in that kind of vulnerable, courageous conversation?
I think most people can. I think it definitely takes practice. I think that I was conditioned because I worked in strategy consulting, in management consulting, and we had to do this feedback all the time. So you kind of get used to it and to not take it personally. It definitely is easier when you're doing well and the business is doing well. When people give you constructive feedback, you're like, oh, great, you're helping me do better. But when you're not doing well, you feel like you're not performing or the business isn't performing, then when people say that, you feel like, oh, that's why we're not doing well. And then you start blaming yourself and you start feeling bad. And so there's definitely an element of like where you're coming from and where you're sitting at that moment. I think that you should also take into consideration when you're giving other people feedback as to like where their starting point is. Because there's some days where I'm just feeling really bad and I just can't take it. And we'll either postpone it or we'll just go easy on each other when we've had a really tough week. So I think most people can get there. I think it's practice and it's also contextual depending on where you're at that day or that week.
So we're talking a little bit about feedback on a sort of abstract level.
Mm-hmm.
Would you feel comfortable sharing like what's the actual language that you're using, like for a specific feedback session? Because I think that hearing to give feedback is one thing. Hearing the actual words that are being used, I think is what can be really helpful. So I don't know if that's something you are able to share or not.
I can definitely do that. I will give myself feedback just so I'm not putting anyone else out there. Okay, so we recently brought on our first, I guess, employee other than the coaches and our head coach and clinical advisor, but those are they play a separate role. I was still running our processes in efficiency mode. And bringing the second person in, I gave myself the feedback that this person needed to be included into more things and that my focus on efficiency was not doing a good enough job to help foster buy-in and pushing forward of the vision. And I think that when there's just two co-founders, it's very easy that both people are pushing it forward and kind of like using all of your might. But when you bring in that third person or that fourth person, you need to take a lot more conscious effort to make sure that they are on board and pushing it forward as well. So I gave myself the feedback that I didn't think I was doing a very good job at that. And then I came up with basically ideas of how I was going to combat that for the next week, which included a couple extra meetings I was adding and also included a little bit of reflection and feedback that I would do between me and the new employee as well, so that we would be able to essentially just move forward more as a unit of 3 rather than a unit of 2. And so that was 2 weeks ago.
And when you say efficiency mode, what do you mean by that?
So when I'm in an efficiency mode, I don't think I do a good job inspiring. I start a meeting and I say, okay, these are like the 3 goals that we need to do. I already know the best way that we're going to have to get there. Here are the deliverables. We're going to do 3 minutes of brainstorming here, 5 minutes of brainstorming there, and then I'll follow up with the next steps and I'll summarize because I know best. I'm extremifying it a little bit, but I can easily get into that mode, especially when I'm stressed and especially when there's deadlines coming up and the thing in front of me is important. But I know on like a more philosophical level that that's not how you inspire people. And it might get you through this one particular task very well, but tomorrow, the day after, the person who was on the other end is not going to want to do a very good job with whatever task that we're working on together.
So I imagine too, especially in the beginning, so much of building a successful business is about creating culture, right? And so it does seem, so it's interesting because it seems like if you're just focusing on the efficiency of your processes, that sort of seems like it's like the business without the feel.
Exactly. Yeah. And I felt really bad about this because when we had more employees before on our team, I was always the one who invested the most in like culture. I cared so much about it. I always did a lot of things to make everyone feel included. And I think that the pressure of like pivoting and starting a new business and not sharing what's going to happen, it kind of wore down on a lot of that. And I felt like I just needed to produce and think now I'm kind of unraveling a bit of that. And actually recently started working with a founder coach and she made an interesting observation. She was like, a lot of your goals are not about like obtaining something new, but are about shedding something old that you kind of have on you that you don't want anymore. And you're like slowly shedding these habits and these fears and like insecurities, but it's not actually about something that you don't have yet, which was a really interesting observation because it felt way more attainable for me than to have to get something new that I've never gotten before, that I don't even know if I can have.
So, you have these meetings where you have these feedback sessions, whether it's with your coach or with your co-founder and your team, and you make these decisions. And then how do you take that feedback and then integrate it into your the work week ahead?
That's a good question. Some of it falls off, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, good. So am I alone in this then?
A lot of it falls off. It's kind of like, how hard did this thing hit you for you to care enough? And I also try to not let that be the only bar, because I also think, how hard did that specific feedback hit Vic? Because just because it didn't matter as much to me, it obviously mattered to him. So there's definitely an element of making sure the right ones actually pass through the filter. But once they pass through the filter, in the beginning of every week, we write our goals and our intentions. And I recently actually started a new system on Notion as well, that tracks not just my work goals, but my personal goals, which include my feedback as well. So I have that all on one Notion page where I stare at all the time to make sure it's top of mind. But usually not more than like 2 things can bubble up to the top of that, or else it gets lost.
Sometimes I know that feedback is, because I'm also someone who is always seeking feedback. That's, because if you don't seek it, it's going to find its way to you, and it usually hurts a little bit more when you get it that way. Sometimes feedback stings. How have you sort of dealt with those moments where this feedback that you get that just kind of hits the ego real hard?
Yeah. I definitely cry. I cry really easily, which is really surprising to most people in my life because I'm always seemingly laughing. But when it comes to feedback and when it comes to like my impact that I have on others, especially when negative, I definitely am like trying to ask for the details while like tears are coming down my face. So those are definitely not easy. We often do like breaks. So if I'm getting usually it's just me getting emotional, but if I'm getting emotional, we'll take a break and we'll come back later and I'll have time to process it. Usually once I'm in a little bit of a more clear space, I know that I'll be able to hear it better, not kind of react impulsively, not say something that I'm going to regret, and then try to process it in my own time. I think that sometimes it takes a few days to even hear what the person has to say. And sometimes I'll loop back and say like, okay, like now I'm ready to talk about it. Maybe you can just say it again because I'm not sure if I heard it correctly. That's another thing. We try to write down everything as well, because sometimes when you hear it, you just need to see it later. So we always have both, like the talking about it and the record. But yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that. I think for me, it's crying and it's time. Whenever I cry, I feel better afterwards. And time usually solves a lot of my issues when I can look at it with a more clear face. I think also the perspective of, it's kind of cliche, but feedback is a gift. It's like, this person loves you and that's why they're giving you this feedback. If they hated you and they thought you were bad, they wouldn't give you the feedback. So they clearly want to improve and they're on your team, which is hard to hear sometimes in the moment, but afterwards kind of taking that into consideration, it makes it a little bit easier. And then also breaking it down. Once I have action steps, I get all like excited about it. And then it becomes like a project rather than something that is, I guess, more hurtful. So it goes through like the process of starting off as tears and ending in like discrete action steps that end up on my to-do list.
Is this process for you any different if the feedback you're getting is maybe from a user or someone online who's not part of your team? Mm-hmm. How does that kind of work for you?
Yeah. So I'm currently in the phase where whenever a member or a user gives bad feedback, I'm like under the ground, into the mud, like just really impacted. So I think, yes, definitely, because I know that what I said earlier about like, they love you, therefore they're giving you the feedback. Like, I know that that's not the case. So I definitely take it a lot to heart and I need a lot more time. What's most helpful for me is getting second, third, fourth, fifth opinions to help ground me. So I will ask my boyfriend, I'll ask my friends. I know that they're a little bit biased because they don't want me to be upset, but it still helps to help get them to reassure me. Sometimes I'll email these things to like a mentor or advisor or an investor that I really trust. Recently, it has been messaging investors who also have ADHD, and then they will usually be super reassuring and they've seen more than I've seen because they invest in a lot of companies. So they're generally able to help ground me and I trust what they say because they have more time and experience and wisdom than I do. So getting that like second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth perspective helps until you feel a little bit better. And then you layer that with time.
I think from an emotional standpoint, I think especially when you have spent so much like your sweat equity in building something and then you get some critical feedback, whether or not you feel it's warranted or not, because I've certainly gotten feedback where I was like, ooh, that kind of stung. And yes, like I need to think about that because I think that like there's a lot of validity to that piece of feedback. There's also times where I'm like, clearly we're not your target audience. And like, how do you deal with the sting? I know you say you cry, but like, I guess not like, how do you get back up? I guess, because I think it's one of the things that I see a lot of people who I think have such amazing potential to build something wonderfully. And I think that this is the piece that tends to hold them back of, it's just emotion is too hard. I can't take the conflict or the feedback. Where do you get that sense of resilience from when the stuff's hard?
I actually learned this also ironically at my consulting job because consulting was not for me at all. But there's this concept of a feel-good folder where you have an email account or anything like that where you just forward all of your like good emails to where people are praising you. They're telling you how great what you're doing is. And when you do get bad feedback, it's hard not to feel like that is the world and that is the only feedback and that's the only thing that matters. And it's more important than everything else. But I think once you look at it as a stack of like 50 emails of people telling you how great what you're doing is and how it's impacted them in their life. And then you compare it against the one person who really didn't like what you're doing. I guess, make a decision that you're doing it for the first pile of people and not for the second pile of people. And of course, as you mentioned, sometimes there is validity to what people are saying. So I try to parse that out as well. But I think just knowing that people have benefited from what you're doing, that's why you're there. You're not, as you said, with the target audience, you're not there to help everyone. I wish that people sometimes would just be a bit nicer, but right? Yeah, for me that helps.
Actually doing the best we can, right?
Yeah, I know. And I don't know why some people just need to be mean, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah. Let's do this. Let's take one more quick break. And when we come back, I want to hear a little bit more about Shimmer. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our Patreon community. If you want to support the show and grab some extra perks, then consider becoming a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Perks start at just $5 a month, where you can get ad-free episodes of the show in our patron-only podcast feed. At $25 a month, you can join me for our monthly Patreon call that we do every fourth Tuesday of the month. But since the holidays are coming, we'll be taking a break from our monthly coaching call for December, which means our next patron-only call will be on Tuesday, January 27th at 3 p.m. Central. That's Tuesday, January 27th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. Then patrons at $10 a month can get the recording of our coaching calls in our patron-only podcast feed, so you don't miss out on the tips and tricks we share each month. If it's in the cards for you right now and you want to show your support for our work, please consider becoming a patron. Thank you for helping us continue helping other ADHD brains around the world, because we believe that no person with ADHD should feel alone. Get extra perks and support the show when you join our Patreon community at $5 a month or more at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And support can start at any amount that makes sense to you. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from you. Thank you to all of our listeners who tune into the show every week. If you enjoy this podcast and want to stay up to date with our shows, our show notes, and our weekly episodes, then subscribe to ADHD Rewired by going to ADHDrewired.com/podcast or by hitting the subscribe and follow button in your favorite podcast player. And if you love this show, please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player if your app allows reviews. So last week, we talk with Dr. D about boundaries and taking care of ourselves. And next week, I'll be joined by Rati Gorfine, and we'll be addressing 5 emotions that hold us back from success. Then be sure to check out our other shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network, including ADHD Essentials with Brenda Mahan, Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, and ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens. When you go to ADHDrewired.com, click on the podcast tab at the top of the page where you'll find Podcast Network. And launching soon, we'll have 2 more shows with ADHD Rewired. We're getting closer and closer, so keep listening each week for announcements on those. You can also join me and the rest of the ADHD Rewired team every second Tuesday of the month for our live monthly Q&A. It'll be the last live Q&A of the year, so join us by going to ADHDrewired.com/events to get registered so you can join us on Zoom. Find everything from show notes to events and everything ADHD Rewired by going to ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. And thanks for listening. All right, we are back with Chris Wang, co-founder of Shimmer. All right, Chris, tell us about Shimmer.
So in a nutshell, for people who don't know, we offer one-on-one ADHD coaching for adults. This was essentially born out of when I was looking for coaching, when I was diagnosed. It was really hard for me to navigate the process of finding a coach. I think I did 15 to 20 different consultations.
Wow.
Yeah, these were all 30-minute to 60-minute conversations. So
you're someone, when you do something, you go 110% in.
I think you're starting to learn that. And the reason why I was being so detail oriented, I don't even know that's not the right word. It's weird to say that word next to my name, but I was being like that because I saw the price point and I knew it was going to be a really big investment. So I wasn't just trying to choose a coach, but I was kind of procrastinating the decision of if I wanted to spend that money and if I could afford to spend that money, which I know is already a privilege in itself to be able to make that consideration. So that was the start of the process. And then I just kept losing track of all of the coaches and their emails and all of their information that they were sending me and the forms that they were telling me to fill out. That was when I think I posted in a Facebook group and I said, hey, like, is anyone else seeing this? And that's when I met through a Facebook group, our head coach and our head curriculum developer, Xenia and Noelle. And that's when we started just brainstorming. We ended up interviewing thousands of people with ADHD, but also like dozens of like clinicians, experts in the space, and just trying to put something out there and then seeing how people resonate and then changing it a little bit, seeing how people resonate, changing a little bit. And at this point, we had not built anything. It was just an idea in the sky. And then over time, what we designed out was, or the question we're still exploring is, how do we make ADHD coaching more affordable by helping with technology, but retaining the human element, and to make it a little bit like more fun and bite-sized as well. We know that this isn't going to be the solution for most people or all people, but to add to the mix of things that you can consider when you do have ADHD, including kind of therapy, medication, other coaching, body doubling, kind of the list could go on. So what we offer now, our main package is 15 minutes a week. You meet with your coach, you set your focus for the next week, and then in your app, you'll track that focus. So that focus could be as simple as I want to drink 2 bottles of water each day to like more complicated of like, okay, this week I'm going to look at my energy levels at each time of the day, and I'm going to look at that against other things that I'm doing. And then next week, we're going to decide what changes we want to make. So there's a big kind of gamut of what focuses they can be. It's very personalized to the individual, very similar to traditional ADHD coaching. And then in the app side, we essentially try to make things as bite-sized and fun as possible. We have little things. I think all ADHD apps have things like confetti and like cool moving like cute creatures and stuff like that.
Are there flying unicorns?
I don't know if that. I would love that. I don't know
because I know in Asana it's one of my favorite things when I mark it, I think it's done and the flying. I think it's a unicorn or a narwhal or something. And it's the rainbow coming out. Like it's I get so much pleasure from that.
Yes, those things are great. Little dopamine fixes. But yeah, that's what we do. We launched to the public about a month ago after kind of being in beta for a few months, and yeah. I think I lost the rest of my train. The train has departed. Should have taken the Adderall.
As you were talking, I was like, oh, it's slipping. It's slipping. Hold on.
Yeah, you can see it happening.
Okay. You're doing this bite-size kind of coaching, which is interesting because the coaching program that we do with ADHD reWired, it's like the almost exact opposite of bite-size coaching. It is intense, right? It's like 10 weeks, 3 times a week with a big group, twice a week with your accountability team, multiple check-ins a day with your team. What I created was what I needed, and I didn't see around. Like I was seeing a therapist at the time, and I was given homework to do, therapy homework. And, I would get to my appointment about 20 minutes early that next week. So I had time to do the homework that I was supposed to be working on all week long. And I'm like, this is so silly. Like, I asked my clients, because at the time I had my clinical practice, I asked my clients to do homework. Like I'm a fan of like this in-between session work. And yet I found like that the week of time in between sessions, like for me, I couldn't activate. And so I was like, all right, how can I get like regular check-ins? And so I didn't see anything. And so this is why I created this. So I love that in a very similar way, what you've created is something that you were kind of looking for and didn't see.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the real beauty of, a lot of things, but for ADHD apps and ADHD care, it's like everyone's so different. Like people like to just lump, like everyone loves to lump, but everyone's so different and everyone's looking for something different and everyone's looking for something different at a different time as well. So sometimes you need something more immersive for a while, and then sometimes you just want something that's more maintenance, and sometimes this works for you and sometimes this doesn't work for you. So we've had this conversation before about competition versus collaboration in a space that you care a lot about. And I strongly, obviously, both of us are in the boat of collaboration because people need different things at different times and people are going to stack it how they want. And we need choice and we need to find what works best for us. And that's why coaching works so well too, because it's not about here's the answer. It's about let's help you find your answer instead of here's a book with all of the answers. So I definitely am a massive advocate for having more options on the table that are different, that are complementary, that are ran by really cool people, because the community is a fun one. And I think that there is so much we can do if because we all have the same goal.
I'm really curious to know if you're doing anything to sort of for sort of tracking purposes on looking at different kind of demographics and things around like who your clientele is. So over time, you can sort of see, all right, who actually seems to benefit the most from what we're doing and who maybe the least, right? Because when we can do that, we can then speak to those people and say, hey, look, we found people like in your scenario, like do really well with this. We found people who are looking for this, have had maybe a little more of a struggle with what we're doing.
Yeah, we actually have a little bit of early data on that. It's essentially people who don't have as much structure in their lives and don't have a boss, and that entrepreneurs are the obvious one that fall into there, but also artists, creatives, writers, all of those. And basically, if you don't have that built-in structure, those are the ones that we've found that like Shimmer the most, just because we're something that is a little bit lower key that you can kind of afford for a longer period of time. And each week your coach will check in with you. Okay, like how much of that page did you end up getting done? What was hard for you? What was easy for you? Okay, next week. And so we find people generally that fall into like the creative or the entrepreneurial realm. But the second degree of it is probably not having a boss or not having structure. It's still early. So we're still kind of validating that, but it intuitively kind of makes sense.
What are you most excited about for the next, say, 6 months to a year with Shimmer? Is that too far of a time frame?
I was like, when is 6 months to a year? No, I have been forced to think longer term it's weird with startups because you're forced to be able to see further into the future, which is oftentimes hard for people with ADHD. At the same time, like you also have to know that like whatever future that you paint is like likely going to change like every 2 weeks. Yeah. So it's like a weird push and pull that you have there. But I think in general, I'm a big proponent. I was struggling why I couldn't answer that question, but this is super cheesy, but I really believe in the journey over the destination. I think that's how it goes. This is like what I live by, but I think that success for me is being able to be successful every single day. And it's not in this like far-fetched future. So if every day I feel like I'm bringing my full self, doing as much as I can for the company, for our team, for my life, for kind of my partner and my house, my roommate, then for me, that's successful. And I feel like if I'm trying my best every single day and I'm doing all the right things, or at least I think I'm doing all the right things, then hopefully other things will fall in place. And I have the right like support and asking for help when I want to ask for help. That's like as much as I can really do. And then I will feel successful in each day. And then obviously, as you know, there's the days that feel so bad and the days that feel good. But I try not to put too much emphasis on, or at least like wait for my happiness into the future, because you never know what's going to happen. And kind of like your live today is all that you have.
What would you say that being in the startup environment has taught you about planning?
I used to plan way more actually, because I came from consulting. Everything's relative. So it's coming from consulting, and in consulting, the clients that we worked with, I was helping them create like 5-year strategies and like budgets into 10 years from the future. And so I naturally, when I came into the startup world, I tried to do that. I tried to project our revenues into 4 years into the future. That doesn't work. So for me, in a way, I've scaled back and become more of a realist. But at the same time, I think I've gotten a lot better at planning for the next month out. Like, how does each week layer up into the month? And then constantly being able to adjust. I think I wasn't as good at adjusting before because we didn't really have to.
That's kind of what I was getting to, because, and I know in the startup world, like that agility piece, being able to pivot quickly is part of what kind of makes startups, right? And I think that's the same when I'm working in my groups and we're teaching about planning. I can't tell you how many people are like, well, if it's on my calendar and I didn't get to it at that moment, like I failed. It's like, wait, what? It's like, no, move it.
Yeah.
Right? I like to use the analogy of like your calendar and to-do list is like your GPS, right? And if you miss the turn, you have to reroute. Like it's not going to reroute for you.
Exactly. I love that.
So I think there's a lot that we can learn, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, from the way startups kind of do stuff, right? That it's, yes, you have these longer term goals, but like you have to be flexible and pivot to get there, right?
Yeah. And you have to be willing to let go of certain visions. Like you have to hold a longer vision. And I find that visions work well when they're rooted more in like values than specific endpoints.
Ooh, that's good.
But you also need to be able to let go. Like sometimes I paint a picture of next week because I have to align the team at some direction. And then you can't be too emotionally like attached to it because then it doesn't happen. And then you just need to erase that image in your head and come up with a different image for the next week. So there's like a very fine balance between like constantly painting new images and also having like a strong enough North Star or like light that people can still move towards. Yeah, it's very complicated. And I think it's a very intellectually interesting thing to think about that I would want to just continue to get better over time at this.
All right. So nothing to do with Shimmer or anything else we've talked about so far. What are you nerding out over lately?
So I don't know if this is nerdy, but I recently picked up surfing and I think it's because it's amazing because you have to let go. Okay. So back up a bit. I sometimes over prepare and I'm sometimes going to be a little bit of a control freak. When you're surfing,
Chris might send me a 4-page outline of possible ideas of what we can talk about.
I was like, Eric's not responding to me. What are we going to talk about tomorrow? But when you're in the water, like the wave is going to come when the wave wants to come, and it is not going to come for a long ass time. And you just have to sit there if it doesn't come. And then if it wants to hit you in the face and if you're going to fall and you're going to get smashed, then it's just a great way to let go of control and to just be with the elements. I like it better than a lot of other, I guess, like outdoor activities or sports, just because you're so at the whim and you're literally in the water. It's just such an immersive experience. And then the second piece about that is surfing has a very, very steep learning curve. Other sports, I feel like I can pick up and get like kind of good. And then obviously I just drop it once I'm kind of good. That's generally what happens. But surfing, you can't get kind of good. It takes a long time to get kind of good. And I don't know if I'll ever going to get there. And I feel like that's part of the reason why it maybe kept my attention.
That's fun. I do watch like a bunch of like YouTube videos on like surfing techniques, and you subscribe to like surfer podcasts. I actually just watch pros and just wish that I could be like that. I haven't drawn the line of how to get there, so I think I'm not doing it right. I'll just look at the end point and just it's very counter to everything else I've said so far. But with surfing, it's just like, wow, that looks so cool. Like, oh, that kind of looks like I could do that. And then you just get into the water and you can't even stand up, kind of thing. That is funny. So I think I shared it with you in the last book. So I recently got my motorcycle license, and
that's so cool.
So in the beginning of September, I got a motorcycle, and I've been completely just like obsessed with it. Like so much so that my exercise routine kind of like vanished for about 6 weeks, which became another issue. But I'm glad to say it's kind of back. But you know, there's this thing of having something that you kind of love and are almost like slightly obsessed with that pulls you away from the business, that I think is so helpful for the business, right? Because I don't know about you, like when I'm interested in something, I have that tendency, that's all I'm thinking about. And like you need perspective. And so if you don't have that, whatever that thing is that's kind of just grabbing your attention, that gives you that perspective. Because, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, there's always more to do.
Yes.
Always, your to-do list will never, ever be done until you sell your business, right? Or it goes under or whatever, right? So I think having that thing that's fun, that's playful, that sort of can as you said, you kind of surrender to, I just think that's a really helpful thing to have a part of the journey. You know, sometimes the things that are not like obviously connected to what we're trying to do are those supporting elements, I think, really make the journey, as you were saying, worthwhile.
I absolutely love that you said that. I feel like in the startup world, we don't have that mentality enough. I think I've definitely had certain mentors and people I guess, that I respected a lot, basically say that this needs to be what you eat, sleep, and breathe. You need to do this 7 days a week, and that's how you're going to win.
The toxic productivity. You know, and I've been fighting it, personally working on that for myself for years. You know, it takes time, and it takes knowing that not everything is going to become a crisis if you don't respond to everything immediately.
Yes, my coach tells me that all the time, and sometimes I believe her. It's really hard.
And we tend to give the best advice to others that we actually need ourselves. So.
Yes, exactly. It's so much easier. I always talk about strength-based leadership. I think that people, if they figure out what their strengths are and then they hone on them, that's what they're going to be known for. And that is more useful than fixing every little thing that you think might be your weakness. But even I noticed, I clocked this on myself when I started this conversation with you. I was telling you about Vic. I only was sharing about all the things that I was bad at and that Vic was good at. And I clocked that halfway through the conversation, but then you already started answering. It was too late for me to be like, never mind, I also have strengths.
Well, Chris, this is, honestly, personally, I could talk to you for hours, but I also know my listenership and if they're still listening, so thank you for continuing to listen. But I want to respect your time and attention as well. So Chris Wang, it's Shimmer. How can people learn about it, find out about it, maybe try it out?
Our website is shimmer.care, SHIMMER.CARE, or the same on Instagram.
Okay. Any final thoughts you want to leave listeners with?
I think just a sense of gratitude and belonging for you creating this space and for having me on this space. I felt like in preparing, which I realized I didn't need to do, and being a part of this, there's just so much relatability. A small anecdote was right before this, for the last 2 or 3 hours, I couldn't really do much because I was in waiting mode. And then I was like, actually, I'm pretty sure everyone would understand that. So it's okay. And that it's okayness, I think, is not created without great spaces and communities like the one that you've created. And this podcast was such a big piece of also my journey of when I was diagnosed and figuring out what all of this meant. So thank you. I'll leave that to Eric, and obviously the listeners need to exist for Eric to exist. So the entire community.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I am so looking forward to meeting you in real life in a week and a half in Texas. I'm so looking forward to that. So Chris Wang, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
No, thank you.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD reWired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD reWired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD reWired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD reWired podcast network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tibbers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.